I put together this how-to video to show how I repair a vintage quilt prior to making a quilt coat. So first you need to go through and determine what on the vintage quilt is damaged. Sometimes it's the front quilt fabric, sometimes it's the front quilt fabric and the batting, and sometimes it's also the backing fabric. In this example that I'm showing you, the backing fabric was just fine. It was just the front quilting fabric and the batting that needed to be replaced. So I'm going to show you the process that I use to fix those. So I create a patch using a new cotton fabric for the front and also a new piece of batting. And I try and match the batting loft, which is generally a really low loft cotton batting when you're fixing a vintage quilt. And I try and match that batting as best I can. So the first thing you need to determine is, what needs to be replaced. Is it the front fabric, the batting, or the back, or all three? So I always create a patch with whatever needs to be replaced, and I sandwich everything using a double-sided fusible interfacing. And I'm going to show that in detail in the video in just a few minutes. You can also quilt it. You don't have to use the double fusible interfacing. I just find it a little bit easier. And then once I have the sandwich where it needs to go, you can see I use a zigzag stitch to attach it. And here I'm going to show you how I make that patch. So in this example, it's the front piece of quilt fabric that needs to be replaced and the batting. The backing was fine on this quilt. So I'm cutting a piece of fabric that is the size, bigger than the size that needs to be replaced. And then I am also cutting a piece of batting to match the fabric. There's the double fusible interfacing. So that's what I use. I iron those two pieces together. You could quilt them together. It would, it would look, you could match the quilting to the existing piece. I find this a little bit stronger. You could do both. You could quilt and use the fusible interfacing. So that's up to you. But there's my sandwich, my little patch sandwich. It's the batting and the double fusible interfacing and the new cotton fabric. My interfacing requires a damp cloth, so that's what that is. And then I also have just an iron safe mat that I'm using so I don't get that fusible sticky on my iron. But once I have that patch ready, then I cut it to fit the hole. This is a really weird piece, so I was just using pins, and then I just cut it to the exact size. And then when I sew it, I use that zigzag stitch, but it's also really important that you hold those two raw edges together, and I'll show you that when we're sewing it. Now we're ready to sew. So I make sure I'm using that zigzag stitch and I'm catching both raw edges. I'm holding those two raw edges together so they butt up against each other. So that zigzag stitch really catches both sides and it's going to be really strong.